evening, welcome to Newslink. Foreign embassies in Beijing are taking steps to protect their nationals as the situation in the Chinese capital continues to deteriorate. Latest reports say troops and tanks have taken up combat positions in the city, amid persistent reports that clashes have broken out between different military groups. Fighting between different military battalions is reported to be taking place around the Nanyuan air base south of the city, fueling fears that China is heading towards civil war. A reliable Chinese military source said the fighting was serious and artillery shelling could be clearly heard. A Western diplomat said there is solid evidence to back up the reports. It's commonly known the Chinese military was sorely divided on the decision to march into Tiananmen. The source is believed to centre on the refusal of the 38th Troop to obey the order to storm Tiananmen Square. They're now being told to take over from the 27th who carried out the massacre. 20 tanks and 15 truckloads of soldiers from the 27th have now taken up combat positions along Beijing's main Changlan Avenue. Meanwhile, more people have been wounded or killed as soldiers continue to spray citizens with automatic gunfire. 4 men were gunned down when 17 truckloads of troops attacked a group of protesters at a road junction. And an 18-year-old girl was shot in the back as a tank chased her up a narrow alley. About 30 tanks have taken up position in an area crammed with foreign embassies, and it is no longer safe to walk the streets there either. China state television has continued extolling the success of the military operation and mourning military casualties. It also showed a film of an attack on a military convoy by a handful of protesters. Broadcast on CCTV today, it shows people stoning a lorry and beating the driver. It was apparently televised to convince Beijing residents that it is the people who are to blame for the violence in the capital and martial law regulations. Civilian casualties are receiving only scant attention, despite the fact that as many as 7,000 people are thought to have died in Saturday night's clash. Meanwhile, in cities across China, where news other than the official version is only just filtering through to residents, outraged people have taken their protests into the streets. Strikes have crippled many cities. In Shanghai, absent bus drivers brought traffic to a standstill, and trains are unable to run through Wuhan, where more than 1,000 protesters are sitting on the tracks. Some military activity has already been seen in those areas. Military aircraft are flying over Wuhan, and in Nanjing, troops have taken up position outside the local university campus. One of the leaders of the Hong Kong Democratic Alliance has reportedly been arrested in Beijing after Chinese security officers stormed the plane carrying him and other Hong Kong residents back to the territory. The report, which was relayed by the plane's pilot to Legislative Councillor Martin Lee, said the officers forced Lee Chuk-yun off the plane and brought him back to the terminal. The plane was later allowed to take off, but without Mr. Lee. Meanwhile, AMELCO members have expressed shock at the bloody events in the Chinese capital. Here's Carolyn Libby.
Senior Executive Councillor Dame Lydia Dunn says the recent violence indicates how different our systems are and says that many of us take our freedoms here for granted.
The events in China have highlighted how very different our two systems are. We in Hong Kong, no matter how angry we are, we must put all our energies into preserving our system, the separateness of our system, in particular, the freedom of expression and the freedom of the press.
Meanwhile, Legislative Councillor Stephen Chong says the Hong Kong Support Alliance's proposal for a one-day strike on Wednesday wouldn't hurt Hong Kong.
Share prices on the local stock market have taken a sharp plunge in the wake of the violence in Beijing. The American President, Mr. Bush, has condemned the military crackdown on pro-democracy demonstrators in Beijing and has ordered an immediate suspension of government military sales and export of weapons to China. Mr. Bush said he deplored the decision to use force against the demonstrators and urged the Chinese government to return to its past policy of restraint. Meanwhile, the British Foreign Secretary, Sir Geoffrey Howe, has summoned a senior Chinese diplomat in London to register Britain's concerns about the bloody suppression of student demonstrators in Beijing. In another development, the British Parliamentary Foreign Affairs Committee says it is reconsidering its recommendations for a report on the future of Hong Kong. It says the rethink is necessary because of the bloody military crackdown in Beijing. The chairman of the Parliamentary Foreign Affairs Committee, which is 2 months into a report on the implementation of the Sino-British Joint Declaration, claims the Chinese government's handling of the 7-week-old student protest has thrown their recommendations into chaos. Conservative David Howell claims it would be impossible not to take serious note of the way the troops stormed into the capital, killing thousands in response to what was essentially a peaceful demonstration. However, the committee still intends to submit its final report on time this July. And Mr. Howell feels, however awful the situation in China, it may well mean their report is viewed much more favourably by Parliament than was originally expected. Meanwhile, the government has set up a hotline for people worried about the safety of friends or relatives currently in Beijing. The number to call is Hong Kong side 869 1313. Hong Kong side 869.